Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. One of the best bad books I have ever read, or one of the worst good books I have ever read. So this is the book that Barbara Streisand Nick Nolte film from the 90s was based upon. And I'm a big fan of that movie, actually. In fact, I'm more of a fan of that movie than I am this book now, having read it. But Pat Conroy was a big name in American letters, especially when it came to Southern literature. And I had never read one of his books, but I wanted to. So I picked up The Prince of Tides because I had heard that it's generally considered his best. And I read it, and I have such mixed feelings towards this book now. I really do. This book inspired such a mixed response in me reading it. But we're going to talk about that. So, what is The Prince of Tides about if you have not seen the Barbara Streisand Nick Nolte film? There's this guy named Tom Wingo. He is from South Carolina. It rams that home just about every other sentence in this book. He's from South Carolina. And his twin sister, Savannah, is a renowned poet who is uh, mentally ill and carries around a lot of baggage from some trauma that they endured in their childhood. And there was a lot of trauma in their childhood. And so she has just recently attempted the latest in a long series of suicide attempts and is now confined to a psych ward in New York City. Tom's marriage is on the rocks as well. His wife is having an affair on him because he's been rather inattentive lately due to basically the same trauma that is dragging his sister down. And he flies up to New York City to tend to his sister and confer with his sister's psychiatrist, Dr. Lowenstein, who is played by Barbara Streisand in the movie, and to relate to Dr. Lowenstein the history of Savannah's life and upbringing, so they can hopefully figure out how to save her. And in the process, Tom pretty much lays bare his own history and has to grapple with the demons that he's been dragging around since his childhood. And, eventually he strikes up a romance with Dr. Lowenstein. That's actually mainly what the movie is about. The movie is different from this book in tonality because the movie is basically just a romantic drama, and this book is not really that. In fact, the romance between Tom and Dr. Lowenstein only comes into play basically in like the last fifth or sixth of this book. And if you can't tell, this book is a behemoth of a book. It is almost 700 pages long, and the movie made it be more about the romance. It made it just kind of be a straightforward romance, and this book is definitely not that. This book is a lot of things. It is melodramatic, it is ridiculous, it is contrived, and it is rather phony. However, it does have a lot of positive things about it, so I'm going to try to, you know, balance my perspective as best as I can to try to be impartial. So that's basically the plot of this book because it covers a lot of territory. And ultimately, the premise of this book doesn't really support what it ends up being. In fact, it's kind of silly what it is. This book is a first person narrative narrated by Tom, and the whole book is basically just him uh, relating to Dr. Lowenstein his and Savannah's and their brother Luke's history growing up in South Carolina. And their parents were terrible. Their dad was an abusive asshole. Their mom was an absolute bitch. They had a terrible childhood. And they all carried around some serious baggage because of that, and it's affecting them in different ways. And so this whole book is kind of an examination of childhood trauma and coming to grips with the past and all that good stuff. But um, if you have seen the movie with Barbara Streisand and Nick Nolte, and you got the impression that this story was a work of like realist literary fiction, you would be mistaken. This book is in many ways flat out ridiculous. In fact, I was kind of surprised at just how over the top it got at certain points. I'm not going to go through everything in here, but there's a lot of crap in this book that just stretches credulity, involving kidnapping a dolphin from an aquarium, And there's just a lot of stuff in here that's just kind of just a little bit much. And also, like I said, the premise of this book does not ultimately support what it becomes, because it becomes a lot. The whole book is just Tom telling the story of their childhood to Dr. Lowenstein, but the problem is that none of that's really necessary at all. So he flies up to New York to go be with his sister who's just tried to kill herself, but then he's told, like, no, you can't see your sister, she's in a very delicate mental state, and you've got to stay here and tell me her history and her past so we can figure out how best to treat her. Now, if you have seen the movie, again, you will know that the central issue of this book, the central trauma of this book, is that their whole family almost got raped graphically. And when I say graphic, I mean, damn, the rape scene in this book is insanely explicit. And it's weird because this book has like some sexual material in it. It has some, affairs, extramarital flings, and what have you. But all that is just glossed over and not really described at all, which I appreciate because, I'm not one for gratuity. But when it comes to the rape scene in this book, he held nothing back. I mean, he went all out and lavished this brutal, unbelievably, spectacularly sordid scene with so much detail that I don't think I'll ever get that out of my head. But that's the central trauma to all their childhoods in this book, is they all get raped by some escaped convicts. And any normal person, I think, would probably just tell the shrink, they would say, look, my sister already had some uh, mentally ill tendencies growing up, and then we all got raped by convicts, and that was just the final straw. Case closed, that's all you really need to know. But oh no, that's not what we get. Tom proceeds to relate nearly 700 pages of their childhood from before their very birth to the death of their brother Luke, which is another trauma on top of the mountain of traumas that we've already been told up to that point in this book. It's just so unnecessary. It is so ridiculously unnecessary because, like I said, first of all, any normal person, especially if your marriage is on the rocks and your wife might be leaving you, very soon, and you're trying to save that marriage, you probably wouldn't want to be gone for an entire summer, which is how long it takes Tom to tell Dr. Lowenstein the story, the absurdly sordid story of their childhood. You wouldn't think that you'd want to be gone that long, and you wouldn't have to be gone that long because, like I said, any normal person could probably just tell what needs to be told over a phone call. You could just say, hey, my sister has some kind of mental illness, and yeah, we got raped by convicts, and she tried to kill herself shortly thereafter, and it's been downhill ever since. That's all you need to know. But oh no, we get the whole kit and caboodle with this thing. We get from before their very birth up to, almost up to the where the story actually starts. It's just so unnecessary because half of the stuff that Tom tells in this book does not even involve Savannah. Like, it's the whole book reads like, your sister just tried to kill herself. I need you to tell me why she might do that. All right, I'll tell you that. But first, let me tell you about myself. Let me tell you about 700 pages almost of myself. It's just so much, and it just goes on, and it's not always interesting. There's so much in here that doesn't even contribute to anything, the main conflict of the book. It's just, again, pretty unnecessary. But let's talk about the writing in this book, because the writing in The Prince of Tides is absolutely a double-edged sword. Pat Conroy was obviously pretty adept when it came to writing. He had a great command of the English language. The prose in The Prince of Tides is incredibly lush and vivid. He really did have a great command of English. But the problem is that this book also veers on several occasions into all out purple prose. And my critiques of the writing in The Prince of Tides are going to rest on what purple prose actually is. And we need to talk about that because there's not one set definition for what constitutes purple prose. And, if you ask some people, they might just say, well, purple prose is using big words where small words will do, or it's being unnecessarily flowery and poetic. This book definitely is flowery. Like, this is some seriously flowery writing in this, but I do not believe that necessarily makes it purple prose. And to me, the definition of what I consider to be purple prose has to do with words being used in contexts that they don't need to be used in, words being used incorrectly for effect, words being used in such a convoluted manner that you lose sight of what they're actually trying to say. I have no problem with big words. I mean, if you just say that using big or obscure words constitutes purple prose, then Cormac McCarthy's entire bibliography is just purple prose. But I don't think that's what it is. I think, to me, purple prose is using words incorrectly for effect, or, like I said, making them be so convoluted, making the passages be so convoluted that you lose sight of what they're actually saying. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples in this book as to what I think constitutes real purple prose. So on page 80 here, we have this line. He moved in the inhuman light of the lantern toward my mother's bedroom. Okay, first of all, that's dumb as hell to describe it that way. This is adjective overload. All light is inhuman. Unless you have been extraordinarily irradiated, humans do not naturally emit any kind of uh, effulgence. So to say that he moved in the inhuman light of the lantern, that's retarded. All light is inhuman. It's adjective overload. You're just putting words there to pad these sentences out to make them more ornate than they really need to be. You could have just said he moved in the light of the lantern toward my mother's bedroom. That's all you had to say. But putting that word, he moved in the inhuman light of the lantern, that doesn't mean anything because all light is inhuman. The light bulb right above me right now is inhuman. It is not a human light bulb. So it's just stupid to put that word there. But then we have this passage on page 57, actually, and it reads as thus. But I knew my role so clearly now, knew the tyranny and the snare of maleness, and I would walk toward my sister as a pillar of strength, a vegetable king striding over the fields of our shared earth, my hands sparkling with the strength of pastures, confident in cycles, singing of her renewal, comforting her with the words of the coach and good news from the king of seasons. What? Like, I get kind of what that's trying to say, but it's so overblown, so ridiculous that you can't really take it seriously and it becomes unintentionally comical. That's purple prose. And this book goes there several times. It's very well written for the most part, but there are times in this book where Conroy just goes off the rails with the purple prose, with just overloading the sentences and making them so ridiculous and stupid, frankly, that you can't really take it seriously. And so, like I said, the writing in The Prince of Tides is really a double-edged sword. It's very lush, it's very vivid, it's very elevated, but you're walking a fine line sometimes, and this book a lot of the times just veers off into just flat out purple prose, and it gets kind of ridiculous at times. But the characters in this book are pretty good, all things considered. I don't really have a lot to complain about with the characters. I think for a first person book, because I've said it many times before and I'll say it again, when you're writing a book in first person, you kind of get an out because all you really have to develop is your narrator, because that's the only character realistically that would be required to be fully rounded is the narrator. But Conroy does a pretty good job of fleshing out the secondary characters in this book. Dr. Lowenstein is herself trapped in a failing marriage, or a strained marriage at least. She has lots of conflict with her son. and we get kind of a glimpse of her inner pain that's pretty affecting. And then we understand Tom's parents, Henry and Lila Wingo, one of whom is abusive and the other of whom is just a complete bitch. They're not good people. In fact, they suck hard, but we understand them. They're pretty well rendered characters. So the characters, I'm not going to knock really. I think it's pretty well done in that area. But thematically, this book is remarkably shallow for how big it really is. You would expect with a book this big, you get some like really, profound meditations on whatever, but you really don't. This book is really kind of top water, surface level stuff. This is like prime book club material, and I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment. I don't mean like a cerebral kind of book club. I mean like a book club of bored suburban housewives who will gather around on the weekends and sip Chardonnay and talk about books such as this, which are really flowery and ornately written, but don't really say a whole lot and are really overblown and kind of melodramatic. Reading The Prince of Tides, I can only liken this to like watching one of those movies that are just made strictly as Oscar bait, which is ironically what this book was turned into, basically an Oscar bait movie. But you know the type of film that I'm referring to, movies that are made solely to win awards. They're sweepingly dramatic, often with an element of romance to them, often historical in nature, and they're just kind of, just overdone and just obviously trying to, rack up awards. This book is like that. It's very contrived at times. It's very engineered to kind of milk you for emotions, I think, and it doesn't always succeed. In fact, I don't even think this book got truly good until like the last, like, fourth or fifth of the book. Like only until then, only then did it really get truly interesting and compelling to me. The vast majority of this book, I was just reading the words, not particularly interested in it because it didn't, like I say, get really compelling until almost the end. Um, but this book is kind of like that. It's just phony at times. It feels phony. It feels melodramatic. It is melodramatic. It feels ridiculous because it is ridiculous at times. But I'm not gonna knock it, in my overall rating because I do strive, like I've said, to be impartial on here. So to rate Pat Conroy's The Prince of Tides, I'm going to give this a B plus. The writing is good for the most part, actually really remarkable at some instances, but it veers at more than one point into all out purple prose, which just made me laugh kind of. And this is not the kind of book that intends to make you laugh at. Really, this is definitely meant to be a drama, but it ended up being something of a comedy unintentionally. And the characters are good, and but I'm going to knock it because the premise is so thin and it cannot support the weight of this book. So a B plus is what I'm going to give it. But if I had to give it a rating based upon my personal reaction to it, how I responded to it, I would probably give this like a C minus. It's not the worst thing I've ever read, not by a long shot, but it's not something that really hooked me, and I don't think it's going to be something that hooks a lot of people. In fact, like I said, I'm actually a pretty big fan of that movie, even though it's been a long time since I've seen that. The movie did a better job of telling this story, I think, than the book did because the movie is so much more streamlined and focused, and this book is just all over the place. Like it is so much minutia, so much irrelevant crap that's put in here. It just doesn't matter ultimately. And again, some of it's ridiculous. Like in the movie, the rape scene that happens, they just shoot the convicts. In this book, the convicts get mauled to death by a tiger. No, I'm not making that up. That is actually in here. The people that rape them get mauled to death by a Bengal tiger. And it's just all so much at times. So the movie, I think, did a better job of streamlining the story, making it more focused and goal oriented, even if it did kind of shift the emphasis to just being a romantic drama. I like the movie a little bit more, I think. So yeah, objectively, I'll give this a B plus, but just personally, this is like a C minus level book. It's fine for what it is. It's probably not going to be some kind of earth shaking, grand, revelatory read for you, but if you're into this kind of book, you might want to pick it up. So yeah, The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. Have you read The Prince of Tides? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read The Prince of Tides, I don't know, maybe you want to give it a read if you like the movie, even though I think the movie did it better. But I don't think there's a whole lot you're going to get out of this book in a cerebral sense. You might be touched or moved at certain moments, but that's about it. This book is just kind of phony and silly, honestly, at times, but it's well done enough that I can sort of recommend it. So, yeah, and as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.